Boom. Okay, today is March 29th, 2015, and this is Overgrowth Weekly 93 with Q&A number 9. And this week we were going to... well, I should probably introduce myself first, shouldn't I? Well, I'm Lukas.
I'm Anton.
I'm David Rosen.
And like I was going to say, initially we were going to have just a normal Q&A episode, but there has been some developments on David's plans with the future of Overgrowth. So I think maybe it's best if you just say what's going on, David.
Yeah. So I was thinking about different ways to make the game progress faster. And I've been spending way too much time on engineering recently. So now I'm thinking about attacking the problem from two angles by reducing the amount of work we have to do and also increasing the number of people we have to do it. So I'm thinking of switching over to Unreal Engine 4 to reduce my programming work a lot, and also hiring a lot more artists and engineers to try and make our work go faster, so we can progress faster to a more complete game.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Anton.
I was just going to ask if you make this kind of change, sort of, does that mean that you'll take sort of what you've experimented with and discovered and really focus on what kind of gameplay the game will be and sort of a direct attack, or do you have how much experimentation would be left when you do this kind of, if you do this kind of switch?
I was thinking of kind of doing both a horizontal and a vertical slice approach to try and make the two parts of the graph and then fill it in. So a vertical slice would be like making one level that looks really good and could be final. Like maybe I'd make the arena with a really good rabbit model and really well decorated everything, and testing out all the final sounds and music and everything. And at the same time, I'd be working on the campaign in a much simpler way, like maybe just like a gray box type approach, where it just tests out the geometry and grabbable ledges and all that, everything relevant to gameplay. So then once I have like a playable of the whole game, really, I can start combining those two approaches and just like detail out the whole thing.
I see.
I just want to try and take like a more organized approach to finishing the game. Something easier to produce and to track.
Right. What are the way that you see it? What are the pros and cons of this kind of approach, and where would we go from there?
And we should add as well, of course, as usual, we will be taking questions from the chat. So if you have any questions regarding this, just post them as usual.
Yep.
So from the engine perspective, the pros of switching would be, like, first, their rendering is just a lot better at this point. Like, Overgrowth rendering was really good when I finished the first pass on it back in like 2008. Or maybe early 2009. Like, it had all of these cool new features like image-based lighting and baked ambient occlusion and all of that. And some of the new features like the dripping blood and terrain fading into the background and everything. But now those are all kind of standard, and they're even like a little bit past that in a few ways. Like, you have these different like fading image-based lighting things. Looks like I might be too quiet for people to hear. I'll see if I can amp it even more.
That sounds better.
That's better on my end too, yeah.
Cool.
So to recap what David is saying, he's talking about the potential of switching to the Unreal Engine as a way to speed up production, and then also hire additional resources, which is the more artists and more developers. And so we're sort of, we want to have sort of a conversation with you guys in the chat as to how you feel about this a little bit, and then we're talking about the pros and cons. So David is so far saying that the graphics engine in Unreal Engine 4 is much better than what than what the Overgrowth engine is. And then go ahead and continue, David.
Yeah. So I was thinking that one programmer can understand all of the graphics theory and what's going on, but there's just a lot of sheer work that goes into it.
Did he cut out for you too, Anton?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I think we've lost you, David.
You're back.
Weird.
It's kind of like it progressively is getting louder and louder on your mic now. It's kind of weird.
And then it auto mutes sometimes, I think, when it goes too high. This is weird. I'll try and find the right balance.
Yeah, sorry that we're having some technical issues, guys.
Yeah, but this is a very big change, by the way. For those who just tuned in, we gained a lot of viewer just now, and so what we were talking about is a switching to Unreal Engine 4 with Overgrowth, which would be a huge deal. Are you ready to continue, David?
I think so, unless I randomly cut out some more.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll let you know if you are not audible anymore.
I have to find the right balance between being audible and being clipping out and getting muted that way.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some distortion on your mic right now.
Oh, man. Anyway, so I don't want to keep doing driver compatibility work, because every day I spend on that is a day that the game is not making progress. And a nice thing about Unreal at this point is that it's free and open source, so it doesn't have a lot of the disadvantages that you usually have with any kind of pre-made engine. Like going with Unity, in the game jams I would always run up against some kind of roadblock where I just can't progress. And I think having source access will help prevent that from happening.
So we have a question in the chat from Mr. Tickle Trunk. He says, I can't help but feel this game is starting to go down the Duke Nukem road and never come out if development has to start from square one in a new engine. What's your response to that?
Kind of a concern. But I think there's some key differences. Like, for one thing, Duke Nukem, they started out using an externally developed engine, and they just kept switching from one of those to another. And that's very different from switching from an internally developed engine to an externally developed one, because it's much more of a qualitative difference. Like, I'm not just switching from some older engine to a newer engine, I'm also switching from one that I have to maintain and develop, and one that other people are maintaining and developing. Because every other game using that engine will have their own compatibility reports, which all get factored into the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So how long do you think, have you been working with the engine a bit? Do you think that you could give an estimate for how long would it take to have a version of Overgrowth in Unreal that would be playable?
It's hard to tell exactly, but I think it would be pretty quick. Like within months, probably. Like, I was doing some tests and trying out different prototypes. I made a quick prototype of a dragon game concept that I was thinking of for a while, just to test things out. And it seems... I think I could probably at least get something working within a couple months that's pretty comparable.
Cool. So what are your own like fears of switching to a new engine? And like, have you decided yet fully if you're going to switch even? Or is that still up in the air?
I haven't decided fully. Like if it turns out that there's any major hidden problems that I wasn't thinking of, then I could still turn back. And another alternative is just to try and like hire more people to make a custom engine faster. But I'm leaning towards it pretty hard, at least to try it seriously and see how it goes. Another major change is just having the internal editor. Like that's another difference from the Duke Nukem idea. Is like most of my time right now is spent on improving or fixing bugs in the editor and not in the game itself. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about changing by like not having to do that.
Especially the upkeep. I know there were a lot of tools, and when you first started, you had a developer devoted specifically to working on the editor and the tools, which you no longer have. So you had to sort of take on that work yourself. So having those tools be something that you don't have to think about, it gives people the opportunity to basically just start putting together levels almost right away in a new engine. Is that true?
Yeah, like people can be making levels right now before I've ported anything, really. You just make a scene and you place all your models and make everything work. And that's one of the advantages.
Right.
I was thinking it might also help attract modders with a professional background because they probably already have experience with the editor. They don't have to learn a new one.
Right.
Like if you look on Polycount or any other professional artist forums, all of their assets basically are designed for Unreal 4 already. So they can just edit.
Yes.
Right.
So that's like, of course, a big good thing about using a finished engine. Like everything works from the beginning. You don't need to make the tools. That's a very good point. Which is something that I feel I have been kind of lacking in Overgrowth for a while. Like you do have an editor and everything works, but it's still like it's not 100%. You know, it's still kind of wonky to work with. And having that just work for everyone who wants to make a level right away without having to get used to things that are different or things like that, I think is going to be a big win in the long run.
Right.
Yeah. And also, like after GDC, when they announced it was going free, like $20 a month is not something that would affect the Wolfire budget exactly. But it's not something I'd want modders to each have to pay if they want to make their own levels. So that was actually like a major qualitative difference in what the engine can be good for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the first time that a major engine has ever been free in that way. So that's part of why we never considered it before.
Right.
So we had a question here that I thought was interesting from Mr. Tickle Trunk, I think the same person who asked the last question. He asks, would hiring more people impact the long-term budget in a major way?
Yes. And hiring people is always expensive. And right now we only have like 2 people. So hiring 2 more people would like have our per person revenue. But I think right now we're making like more than enough to live on. So like we have to earn whatever revenue we're getting. And I think that we have to do whatever we have to do to make the game progress as fast as possible for the pre-orderers.
If you hire more people, do you have a way people can contact you?
Yeah. Well, I should just send an email to contact@wolfire.com. But I think we're going to be pretty picky. I kind of want to take more like the John Blow approach to hiring people than the standard kind of AAA approach.
So does that mean that you are thinking that you'll hire people you already know or people who are already well established as a developer?
It's more likely. Like, I want to hire people that are close to the best in the world at whatever they're doing.
Right.
Like someone like Robert Briscoe, who did Dear Esther for environment art, or people in that ballpark.
Got it. Yeah.
We had another question from the chat. Unless you wanted to say something more, Anton.
No. We should take the questions.
What
Yes.
about spooky ghost voice? Could you hear me?
Hi, Aubrey.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Spooky ghost
Yeah.
voice.
Spooky ghost voice.
Yeah. So I'm the
So one
ghost.
other thing is just
the ghost
modders
of
who are
Aubrey,
really
sir.
productive.
What are you saying, guys? You spoke inside of each other.
I was gonna say that also, like, modders who are super productive already
Mhm.
are pretty good candidates to hire. Like, Akazi was consistently delivering on the project even before we hired him. So now he's someone who is probably gonna be helping with the project in the future also.
By the way, Aubrey, I think you can jump into the Skype chat when you want to.
Sure. Yeah, let me do that.
So we had a question from the chat from Bragesb. He asks, how easy would it be to incorporate the movement and combat system from your engine into Unreal?
I think it wouldn't be super hard. Like, the biggest technical challenge I'm gonna try out is probably the active ragdolls. I'll have to make that work with physics instead of bullet. And I'm not sure yet exactly how hard that'll be, but I think it won't be super hard. Because I originally started out doing it for ODE. I already have some experience with porting it between different physics engines.
Mhm.
And aside from that, the movement in combat is more of a design issue than a technical one. Like, technically, it's not very complicated.
Are
Okay.
there any specific things that you want to do in a different way now that you have the chance to make it from the beginning in a new engine?
There are some things that I want to do in a more controlled way. Like, some of the things I did, like when you throw weapons and they collide with people, and it's all based on like which direction it's facing, and so on. A lot of those things in practice turn out to feel pretty random. It's like you throw a knife and just half the time it sticks, half the time it bounces off.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of want to lean more towards being able to design things more specifically. Like ledge grabbing is another good example. Like, I might consider trying marking grabbable ledges instead of having it all automatic, just because there's so many different edge cases. Like right now in levels, if you try and like jump onto rough edges, like if a crete block has been cut in half in a jagged way, then it's kind of unpredictable what parts of it you can grab onto, which makes it hard to design platforming levels.
Do you so in some ways though this makes it more of a traditional engine. I mean, obviously it is a traditional engine, but it means that then the like in these cases it was always dynamic. So for modders, they never had to worry about whether or not there was a grabbable edge, but now for modders, you're gonna have to spend more time making sure that an area is actually climbable than you would in the Phoenix engine.
Yeah, there are different ways to address that. Like, one way would be to make it usually automatic, but then you could like place a volume which turns off the automatic edge grabbing, and then you could add your own edges if you want to for specific cases.
Right.
In that way, you might be able to get the best of both worlds. Like, if you want to spend as much time as possible, you can customize it, but it might automatically work by itself.
Right. And I guess the other thing that the question becomes, would your current animation system move over pretty easily? Would you have to redesign the animations? Would you still use the procedural animation process that you're currently using?
Yeah, I think I would keep using the same process, which is the procedural animation is not really a technical issue. Like it took a lot of work to come across that particular process, but now that I'm familiar with it, I think it's pretty easy to apply to anything. Like in Receiver, I did all the procedural animation for the guns in like a few hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it shouldn't be super hard to do the same thing for the characters. Like
in
a full
some
skeletal character is certainly more complicated than a disembodied gun, but
sure. You said you sort of made an offhand reference while we were talking about Under Glass that you had a lot of the same core mechanics from Overgrowth in Under Glass in basically a week. Does that kind of give you the same impression you might be able to do that in Unreal 4?
Yeah. So
okay.
Under Glass was kind of one of those. Another thing that gave me the impression that it might be faster to use an existing engine, because I was trying to write a new engine from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically did do that. But I couldn't do that and the game at the same time within that time frame.
Right.
So I feel like that might be a metaphor for what's taking Overgrowth so long.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically you're doing two jobs. And it's the kind of job where when you have an idea for one aspect of it, it completely delays your time on the other aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes some time on top of that just to switch gears. And
right.
I'd really like to try just focusing on the game itself for a while.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So just sort of now that we have Aubrey, welcome Aubrey.
Hey guys, sorry.
I sort of my quick question for you, or my first question for you is I'm sure that you and David have been discussing these proposals at length, and sort of what's your first your gut reaction to trying UE4, and it's two parts, UE4 and then also additional people working on the project.
Well, like my first thought about switching engines was just, well, a lot of people have switched engines, and like most famously, like Duke Nukem switched engines several times, and usually it doesn't work out very well. But hey, they eventually shipped, right? Like they actually did ultimately finish that project, but also simultaneously, I'd already looked at Unreal tools, and I just think they're really good. The idea of being able to dig into all of their tool set and be able to use it on one of my own projects is really exciting. So yeah, kind of, I felt both of those things at the same time, and as far as getting some help, I mean, right when we started Overgrowth, we did have some contract help right at the start that we just to test out the idea of using other people, and it worked fine. It just kind of shifted my job role, and a big part of my role became kind of fixing, like making sure the art was good and fixing the problems. And I think a lot of that could be alleviated just by hiring better artists who can do the job with less input. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that.
Right. And how would you, I mean, how much of the art assets that currently exist would you plan to move over, and how much would you think about redoing, or how would you approach the new way of looking at the art assets?
Like the first thing I would do is just go and look at what's currently available, because compared to when we started Overgrowth, the whole like kind of artist ecosystem has changed, and there's a lot of really great art assets that are available basically for pennies, right? Like for a few dollars. So I'm really not against using really great art assets for rocks or trees that would take me a long time to do. So like that's kind of the first step of like integrating that stuff and testing it out. I'm gonna test out SpeedTree probably and see if I like that. I used it years ago, but I haven't used it recently, and see how that works. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of speed this up. As far as the old art, there's some stuff that I think might be.
Did we lose Aubrey?
I think so, yeah.
Sorry guys, I don't know what happened.
So
another point about assets is that Aubrey brought up the marketplace. Like there's the Unreal marketplace, and there's Unity and other asset stores like TurboSquid and so on. And a lot of them, like photogrammetry is becoming a big thing, where you can just like scan surfaces and objects and just import them directly. You have like perfectly realistic objects. So one thing we were thinking for Overgrowth is that we could, anything we make that's not directly Overgrowth specific, like basically everything that's not like a rabbit or something like that, we could try and participate in that ecosystem. So like if I make a really cool rain effect, then I could just put that on the asset marketplace so other people can use it. Because we spend so much time just like reinventing the wheel in games. Like one analogy I use when talking to people is like, how many fire hydrants do you think have been modeled for games? And it must be like thousands at this point.
Right.
And how many fire hydrants do we need? Like one.
Yeah.
Right.
Or one per generation of tech.
Yeah. I'm sure there are a lot of I'm sure, I mean, yeah, like you said, a ton of assets that are like that, and it'll probably be good to, you can capitalize on things that have been made, and maybe even capitalize on things that other people want that haven't been made well, which I'm sure some of those exist also.
Yeah.
So
I just want to try to shift our focus so more of our work is player facing. Like it directly impacts the player's experience. It's like the art that players care about is probably more like the specific characters or weapons and arenas, like things that are unique to the game itself. I don't think people, like aside from game artists and graphics programmers, people aren't usually like walking around and zooming in on the rocks and things to make sure that they're different from the rocks in some other game.
Right.
That's probably true. So if anyone wondered what happened to Aubrey, he got a blue screen crash apparently. And we have another question from the chat here as well. So Preaching96 asks, is there anything that is in Overgrowth that you think might be unfeasible to see in Unreal?
I don't think so. I mean, now, since I have the source code, I could just do anything, really. Like, there's nothing that's impossible to bring over, or even, like, particularly difficult, I think.
Right.
That's good to hear. We have another question from I'm Imperim, who asks, would you ever consider releasing your engine's source if you do decide to port it to Unreal?
Yeah. I don't see why not, really.
Right.
Probably not immediately. But I don't really see much downside to doing that.
Do you think if you did do that, we would sort of face a Lugaru issue where someone sort of releases basically an Overgrowth clone?
We might, but for all the ways that situation kind of was unpleasant, it probably ended up helping us more than it hurt us. So if that happened again, like that would just be a big news event for us.
Right.
So it might not be a terrible thing.
I mean, in some ways, it could also be interesting to see what an open source version of Overgrowth, sort of the Overgrowth continuation project is, because you already have a very, interesting beginning with what you've been working on, and seeing how an open source picks that up and moves forward with it would be kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be cool.
But
we could see if they do a better job than we can. We can have a race.
Yeah, have a race. With the something that I've seen Mr. Tickletrunk ask a couple times is, if you how much time have you spent looking at Unreal 4, and how much time would you spend trying out Unreal 4 before you sort of committed to changing? Like, would it be like... Go ahead.
I spent most of the last week or two doing experiments in Unreal and like stepping through the source code to understand what exactly it's doing. And it's actually doing a lot of the exact same things that we're doing. Like, we're using recast and detour to calculate nav meshes in a certain way, and using NVIDIA texture tools to dynamically compress textures and so on. So a lot of their stuff is actually literally just using the same libraries in the same way that we were.
Mm-hmm.
So some of that wouldn't be too different. But yeah, so I didn't see anything too alarming in the code. And the tests I did, I tested on all of the different computers that I have access to, and it ran on all of them pretty well. Like even the weird Intel graphics card and the Steambox thing they gave us at Steam Dev Days.
Right.
So I'm pretty encouraged that the compatibility should be pretty decent.
Would that mean less time spent optimizing the game as well?
Yeah. Like, to some extent, it wouldn't be my responsibility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have to use it in an efficient way, but I wouldn't have to think about it at the same level. Like, for Overgrowth, I have to think about, like, what's the fastest way to draw all the grass instances on different graphics cards. Like, the vertex shader on this graphics card can only handle 40 uniform matrices, so I have to use batches of 40, but Unreal just has all these different paths for all their different graphics cards, and even like Xbox and PS4 and iPhone and so on. And I just don't want to do that anymore.
Sure.
So you're basically fed up with engine programming. Sounds like.
One of the part of it.
One of the cool things about the Unreal tools is that there's a lot of stuff that I can't do in the Phoenix engine, like writing and integrating shaders, that is just kind of built into Unreal. So not only will David not have to do all of that, but a lot of stuff that I'd like to do, and we can kind of offload from David. Like, I can do some shader stuff. And a lot more scripting stuff also.
Yeah, a lot of the tools are more artist-friendly, like the node-based blueprints and materials systems are, I think, a lot easier for people to learn than the text editor approach.
Yeah,
as a programmer, that's kind of hard to understand sometimes, because like the text editor is so linear and simple. But I think for most people, that's not how it works.
Well,
Right.
like one of the big differences too is just the amount of documentation for Unreal, and so like if I do have a question, I don't have to bug David, which doesn't improve his productivity. Um, I can just
You can just look on the forums
Google it.
even.
Yeah, I can just Google the best practices, and I can see 10 different examples of ways people have done the thing that I want to do and pick the one that I like best.
Right. So
That was a pretty convenient thing we found in game jams working with Unity, is that most things that you might want to do, someone has already tried to do. So I want to
interesting.
spend less time doing the things that everyone has already done and spend more time doing the things that nobody has done yet.
Yeah,
Right.
also
It seems like a
if,
better use of engineering effort.
if people have tried it and have run into like serious roadblocks, you know that before you even start out. So you can think, well, how am I going to get around this roadblock rather than doing exactly what they did and then running into the exact same problem. So it's just a lot faster when there's really good documentation and a lot of a big user community.
Right. I was curious, when we did Receiver, one of the big things was that every time you went into a new room, as you went further and further away from the original spawn point, there was a longer and longer delay every time you moved from room to room as things were being rendered, because there was no way to optimize Unity for that kind of tool. So you're saying that with Unreal, you have access to the source, so you would be able to bypass those types of limitations that the engine might have.
Right. There's no hard restrictions if you can just change whatever you want in the source code.
But
Right.
I'd also point out that as far as I can tell, those kinds of weird gotchas, they're not really present so far in my testing. Like, I don't think that's going to be a problem in Unreal, especially not for just like rendering stuff.
Right. So Unreal is maybe more is a little further developed and a little more open than Unity. Is that correct?
I'd say a lot. Like, Unreal was at version 3, the third generation, before Unity even existed, before anyone even thought of making it. So it has like decades more development time and iteration gone into it. And it's open source, which Unity isn't.
Right.
It might have a little bit more baggage, like a few more tools that are not strictly necessary, just kind of hanging out, that aren't fully supported anymore, that sort of thing. And so those can, like, that's the kind of gotcha that you're going to have to worry about working on Unreal. It's like, oh, am I using tools that aren't really intended to be used anymore?
Right. Yeah, but you guys experienced that with the Phoenix engine too. Like one example was the paintbrush tool was a great asset early on, or a great tool early on, and then something later broke it, and then people tried to use it over and over, and it would crash the system. Updating the attachment system was sort of the same thing, right? So, yeah.
There are a few cool things in the Overgrowth editor. Like, I still prefer some aspects of it, especially the new attachment system. I find just really easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd probably have to add something like that to Unreal, because like the tools they're really designed for a specific kind of game originally. Like they're designed for corridor-based first-person shooters, and they can be used for a lot of different things. Like now, it's kind of encouraging that they're moving towards more open terrain rendering. Like in their recent kite demo, they added a bunch of cool rendering features just for that, which we can probably use.
Right.
So there's some challenges, but I think a lot of them there's a lot of new stuff that would make it worthwhile.
Yeah,
Right.
kind of on that same idea. I think that there are a lot of things that, at least for an Overgrowth style game, like I think our core editing tools are snapping tools or duplication tools are just a lot faster and easier to use. Like our basic transform tools for like non-uniform transform and snap to angles and stuff. It's just a lot faster and easier than Unreal, um, but the stuff in Unreal totally works, and it does work better for certain types of games than the tools that we created. So I don't think it's really like our stuff is better. It's just kind of like, well, it's going to be slightly not quite as fast and easy as making levels in Overgrowth using that editor. But placing like rocks and stuff is really a pretty minor amount, like a minor thing compared to a lot of the other things that I spend my time on. So I'm not super concerned about that.
Right.
So we are about like 10 minutes over when we usually would stop going. So maybe we should cut it here.
It's up to you guys. I had a couple more things I thought we could maybe touch on before we move, but it depends if you guys have the time.
I got here late, so I'm down for a while longer.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of a big topic to think about.
Yeah. So I was thinking, if we, sorry, not if we, one of the things that I know you guys were really happy with when you first released the engine was your height map rendering. I know that you had sort of what Philip called the off the grid rendering, which created sort of a little more extreme height map rendering. Is that one of the things that has been sort of updated in the rest of the world, or are we going to lose some of our height map level design, things like that?
So that's so Overgrowth off the grid rendering. I think it is a good idea to use like non-grid based simplification for terrain, and Unreal's built-in terrain uses grids. But on the other hand, it just tessellates the grids so finely that it would still be higher detail than our current terrain.
Okay.
So at some point, we could have a very finely tessellated, non-grid based simplification, which would be even better than that. But I also don't want to focus on that right now, just because.
Right.
I just want to focus on the game for a while.
So I have tested the Unreal stuff using our assets, and like in some extreme cases, you see the grid artifacts, which I don't like, right? But like David says, you can just crank up the detail, and Unreal will just render it. So there's some of it is kind of mitigated by how efficient their grid rendering technology is. Some of the stuff that I used to hate about the old school height map rendering, they don't have those problems like the old stuff did. So like the terrain actually does have proper normal maps for shading, which makes it look a lot better than just using the grid for shading. So yeah, it's kind of halfway in between. They've definitely implemented some really big improvements over the years since we started doing our stuff, but some of the problems are still there. Ultimately, I think that the Unreal technology is really cool because it can do some stuff that we can't. Like it just can make way bigger terrains, for example. So that would be something that I've started to test out a little bit just to play around with, if for nothing more than to have, more stuff going on outside the level.
That makes sense.
So it's kind of mixed. Like there's some pros and cons, even in terms of rendering. Like we have some cool things with our decals that they don't have, like how it blends out the underlying normal maps, and a few other things. But I think like their engine kind of takes more of a brute force approach, and at this point, I think that would still end up looking better overall, just because of their improved like driver support and low-level optimizations.
That makes sense. And I'm guessing that, suddenly having the inclusion of point light sources and those types of easy, already designed elements to the engine are going to be much easier to deal with for you guys.
Yeah, I'm super excited by the particle editor. Super excited to dig into the cinematic editor. I've tested out the menu stuff. The menu stuff is pretty cool. There's just so much. Like the real downside is that the tools are so deep that it's going to take a while to learn them. There's so many different tools that are so far along that learning all their features and how to use them well is going to take some time.
But this would be where the advantage of hiring some people that are already specialists. They could get you working fastest in the most efficient way possible to do what you guys want, right?
Right.
So this is, I guess, maybe this is sort of a way to breach a new topic, but also we'll try and wrap with this thought is, if David is no longer focused on technology as this competing force to making the game, then the sort of most logical place to go would be to actually creating a playable game, things like that. So one of the things that you've always said to me is about what the game will be like is, we'll see what all of the tools are when we get there, and we'll make a game based on what kind of tools we have. This point now, it feels like all of those tools are kind of there. So do you guys already have a more solid foundation about what you want the game to really be? And if you do, sort of where you want to go with that. I saw that question a couple times, single character, multi-characters, or different, focusing on the different races, or how much time are you going to be freed up to work on the game if you make this switch?
I think it's kind of mixed because on the one hand, we can't just make whatever tools we want as quickly for the game type we want to make. But it also makes a lot more freedom for what kind of game the engine already supports. It's like Overgrowth. Right. People would say like, oh, I want it to be open world or online multiplayer or whatever, and I was like, no, we can't. We probably can't really do that because that would be too much work. Because we'll have to create all of the infrastructure there from the top to the bottom. But now a lot of that stuff is more feasible.
Right.
So you have to do more of this horizontal slice testing, like low fidelity tests with the gameplay, just to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I want to change the development instead of creating high fidelity assets and tools and then figuring out what to do with them. I want to start by figuring out what we want to do exactly, and then say, okay, we need this asset, this asset, this asset, this technology. I want to have a very clear path. So I think we'll definitely want to have the arena mode, because that's kind of the core way to test out the game.
Certainly for the combat,
like it a lot.
Right.
So I think that'll be our vertical slice target. And the horizontal slice, we're going to have to experiment to see what's the best way for the game to be. Because it could be linear levels, or we could have some kind of structure like Bloodborne, Dark Souls, or there are a lot of different options to test out.
Right.
It's going to be really interesting to see what the game ends up becoming, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks a lot everyone for watching and listening, and we will be back in 2 more weeks with another episode. So don't forget to write your questions in the forum thread about all this. I'm sure there is more to ask.
Right. I'm sure there's a lot more to ask, and I think let us know, how you guys feel about this transition. If you guys see any pros and cons, please be sure to let us and the dev team know where to go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How the
totally want to
player
hear what people
community-
think.
How the player community and especially the mod community feels about this is a big factor in what we want to do. So I'd definitely like to hear more from them.
So
Great. Do you want to say anything, Anton, before we go?
no, it's fine.
Cool. So this week, since we've missed fan art like 2 times in a row or something like that, so long ago, we're gonna end it with the fan art watch. So yeah, have a good one, everyone, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.